Hey everyone, my name is Mike Henry, and this is my Procreate 4.3 demo for the piece I call We Three Heads. So here are 3 heads that I sketched on one sheet of paper a long time ago. You're going to see me bring the lines in here and just sort of erase them and edit them. I did a piece a while ago called Aunt Becky. I think it was Aunt Becky, and she's also from the sheet. You could actually see her just get erased at the bottom of that page, and she was also just a head, but at one point I finished by adding her, a body to her and a small scene and stuff like that. For this, I just wanted to kind of have fun and do 3 heads that have 3 different lighting schemes, and that was really the only thought behind this. So we've got these 3 heads that were all sketched on one page, now rearranged. I've desaturated the image, and I think they're all on separate layers. Just for the ease of arranging things, I can't remember. Given the fact that the girl and the dude in the middle have that overlapping square, I think that they are on different layers. But anyways, the point though is that I just desaturated them, adjusted their contrast, and set them to multiply, and that's exactly what I showed you a few videos ago with how I prepare lines. And so with this, we've got the lines all set. I know I'm not going to keep them around, so we're just using them as a guide. However, one thing is I liked the paper texture, so I do bring a paper texture in later to just sort of add a little bit of interest to the image. But you're going to see that each one of these characters is lit differently. Either they're lit directionally differently, or they're also it's the colors that I'm using for the lighting, and so that was just sort of the fun I wanted to have here. There's no logic as to why each one is lit a certain way. It was just sort of what I felt like doing. So I start with the old guy on the right, and he ends up being lit top down. He has mostly desaturated and somewhat heavy shadows, and he's fairly brightly lit. It's almost like he is in a nice clear day. The dude in the middle, he gets lit kind of from the top right, and he gets lit with a blue light and a red shadow. And then the girl starts by being lit with see, what does she have? I mean, she's got purple shadows. I don't know. I can't remember if I make it to the lighting, the highlights or not. But she's got purple shadows, but then I end up switching those to more of a green later because she's sort of got a lot of monochromatic hues. And so I end up changing her shadow color just to get a little bit more variety in there. So as it stands right now, this is flattening process, and then shadow process and all that kind of stuff. You've seen me do this a million times. So I'm gonna go silent for the rest of this video, not for the rest of this video. I'm gonna go silent until I see something interesting happen in the video. But what I was gonna say is that if you are curious as to some of these methods, I cover them a lot in previous videos, so feel free to look at this video if you are someone who has followed these a lot, or if you just want to kind of watch along, and then I will only pop back in for important things so that I'm not just kind of rambling throughout the entire video. So I'll see you the next time I notice something worth mentioning. here we have the flats for the old guy totally done. You can see there's a lot of variation in his skin because I wanted to capture the fact that he's like one of those guys that's sort of outside all the time. Maybe he lives on a beach somewhere, I don't know. But I was scrubbing through the video just trying to quickly see some things that I wanted to reference, and one thing that I totally forgot about that's kind of interesting about this file is, in an effort to keep my layer count down and kind of a little bit of just like a artificial restriction, because I probably didn't have to exactly do this, I have all the shadows for all the characters and everything on the same layers, because if you think about this from an organizational point of view, you've got all of the flats for the way it's laid out is you've got all the flats for the old guy in a folder, you've got all the flats for the middle guy in a folder, and you've got all the flats for the woman on the left in a folder. And then on top of all of those folders, you have a folder that's like all the, depth layers, like the lighting layers, and that has essentially an ambient occlusion layer, a direct light layer, a highlight layer, and then from there like a string of things like bounce layers and stuff like that. But those three core layers that are about the ambient occlusion shadows and the direct light shadows and highlights are all the same layers. So there's one ambient occlusion layer for all three of them. The only thing that changes really what's happening there is the color that I'm choosing for it. So right now with the old guy, we've got a pretty desaturated shadow happening, and then when we go to the guy in the middle, it's much more saturated, it's much more red, and then when we go to the woman, it's much more, starting purple and then switches to green. And the idea there is that they're all set to multiply because it's the same layer, and they all have the same opacity. And then the same thing is true for the other layers that sort of correspond across them. In fact, a majority of the layers are all shared. However, there's the occasional one-off where, just for speed purposes, I was like, there needs to be, I don't know, like let's say the bounce light under her nose or something like that. And so that's a way that I'm trying to conserve. So really, this is a way of taking a baby step towards something like, let's say, a comic book a comic book page where you have several panels, several characters, and then you've just got basically one layer for like the shadows across the entire thing and one layer for the highlights. In fact, when I did some comic book coloring back in the day, that's very similar to the way that I would work. The only difference is for Photoshop, I wouldn't have the layer limit, so I would do it maybe across, let's say, several layers and then collapse them later just to keep the file size down. But that's a good way that you can try to have like a unified scene, so that going from like panel to panel, it's all the same, but you could also then like shift into a different scene with different lighting and still keep those lighting effects if you need to. And so now we move into the direct light shadow, which is done with the same color on our new layer that's set to multiply. And you can see here there's a direct light just coming right down on the top of the guy, and it's casting the shadow down. So it's a bit of like a sort of like a midday, like a really bright sunny day. However, I'm not bringing a ton of fill into him, like into his neck area. It's mostly about that direct top-down light. There is going to be some bounce light on his neck and stuff, but you'll see it when it happens. After, like in all of these, it's like ambient occlusion, it's like flats, some local color stuff, like some local color variation, and then ambient occlusion, direct lighting, like a highlight of some sort layer, and then going through like a series of reflection and bounces. while now without speaking to anything that's happened here. The guy in the middle is, I mean, I kind of like each one of these for different reasons, but I like the vibe of the guy in the middle and some of the things that I did with the paint style and the lighting that was chosen. He's got this kind of retro vibe, which is kind of cool. So I kind of like him the most. I do kind of also like the guy on the right, just because I very rarely do like a desaturated layer with such like a desaturated shadow with such a direct light kind of hitting on the top. But anyways, I just sort of wanted to come in for a minute and talk about the fact that we are getting close to wrapping up. We're going to have the woman's going to get all of her different layers sort of done. Then those are going to get color shifted over to green, just to bring a different interest to the image. Because right now with like the purple sweater and the purple shadows, and I mean honestly even a little bit the orange, because the orange plays with the purple shadows so well, it starts feeling really kind of samey. And I don't think it's a bad look. It's just it wasn't as interesting as I wanted it to be. It wasn't jazz enough. So I just kind of mess with it and come out with a color that is a little bit more interesting in the moment. wraps up the image. When all is said and done, what we're looking at here is a series of flats and then some shadow layers, some highlight layers, some texture stuff, and then just going through the image and trying to find opportunities for bounces and reflections. And I know that that sounds reductive, but what I'm trying to say by speaking about it also simply is that it's the sum of the parts, and it's about thinking of each one of these things as components, and also thinking about it, of course, as the whole, because that's what you're headed towards. But if you're sort of taking it step by step and handling each one of those elements individually, you will find your piece come together and you will get it where you need to get it to. So for a second here, let's just quickly shift to all of the lighting layers off. This is what the flats look like without any of the lighting layers, and then we turn that folder back on, and this is what we get. So thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this video, please consider liking and subscribing, and I will see you on the next one. And if you're looking for me on the internet, these are the places where you can find me.